She stood at the glass doors of the towering corporate building, her coat a size too big and her shoes cracked at the soles. Emma's fingers trembled as she clutched her resume folder, creased and stained at the edges but still intact. Her heart pounded not from fear, but from the weight of every failure that had led to this moment. Inside, everything gleamed: chrome, glass, polished tile. Receptionists with painted nails and cold eyes barely glanced at her. She gave her name. The woman at the desk hesitated for half a second, then forced a smile and gestured toward the elevators. Upstairs, the interview panel sat in a pristine, sterile conference room. 4 of them. 2 men in slick suits, 1 younger woman scrolling her phone, and a 4th, a man with a silver pen and a stare that cut straight through her. Emma walked in slowly. She could feel her own exhaustion trailing behind her like a shadow. Her blouse, once white, was dull from too many hand washes in motel sinks. She didn't wear makeup. Her hair was clean but not styled. Just real. She stood with her back straight and handed over the resume with both hands. One of the men took it with a smirk. "You're here for the junior analyst position?" "Yes, sir." Silence. The resume remained closed on the table. The young woman finally looked up, her lip curling into a grin. "You worked at a call center 4 years ago? And housekeeping before that?" Emma nodded once. "Yes. I also completed a certification in data analytics last year." The older man tapped his pen against the table. "From an online course?" "Through Coursera, partnered with the University of Illinois," she said quietly. "It was all I could afford." The silver pen man scoffed. "So you're self-taught?" The second man leaned forward. "And what exactly makes you think you're qualified to work here?" Emma's hands were clenched behind her back. "Because I know I can deliver. I've studied your reports, your Q3 losses, your recent restructure." The first man held up a hand, cutting her off. "Miss, look, this isn't a charity." Laughter. The young woman looked Emma up and down. "Where did you even get that blazer?" "Thrift store." Emma didn't flinch. Not once. She had walked in expecting professionalism. She got a firing squad. No one had opened her resume. No one had asked about her skills. They saw her coat, her shoes, her silence, and decided. Then one of them whispered, just loud enough for the others to hear. "She's definitely from a shelter, right?" She was left on the steps of St. Margaret's when she was barely 3 years old. No note. No bag. Just a child in a yellow sweater with dirt on her cheeks and eyes far too old for her age. Emma never remembered a mother's voice or a father's arms. Only the flickering hallway lights of foster homes and the cold language of caseworkers flipping through folders filled with other forgotten children. She was moved 14 times before she turned 15. There were houses that smelled of bleach and broken promises. One foster mother locked the fridge at night. Another made her clean baseboards with a toothbrush. She still had the scar on her shoulder from where a cigarette had accidentally touched her skin, but no one ever believed it was on purpose. The worst home was the last one. She was 17. They called themselves God-fearing. But behind closed doors, the father watched her too long when she passed by in a towel. The mother blamed her for every slammed door and broken cup. Emma stopped speaking unless necessary. She started sleeping in her clothes. One night, when the house was silent, Emma climbed out the window and never went back. She spent her 18th birthday in a shelter in Eastlake. The cake was a slice of banana bread someone had donated. One of the staff members tried to sing. She thanked them, even smiled. But that night she cried so quietly her pillow was soaked by morning. But here's the thing they never expected. Emma kept going. She worked graveyard shifts at gas stations. Learned to live on instant noodles and apples swiped from break rooms. At 21 she took her GED while living in a motel with broken heating. Somewhere along the way she found a donated laptop. Old, glitchy, screen cracked. But it opened the door to something she'd never had before: knowledge. She taught herself Excel, Python basics, statistics. At night, she would sit in the corner of the public library until closing, scribbling notes with a borrowed pen. Life never gave her a safety net, but she built one thread by thread. People pitied her when they heard her story if they believed it. But pity was useless. Emma didn't want sympathy. She wanted a chance. And that's what led her to that interview room. Not because someone opened a door for her, but because she kicked it open herself. She had survived where others hadn't. Not because she was lucky, but because she refused to disappear. Emma had learned to stop expecting kindness. After that brutal interview, the one where they laughed, not listened, she didn't go home and cry. She walked 20 blocks in the rain, shoes soaked through because the bus pass had expired and she needed the cash for dinner. Dinner was half a sandwich and a bruised pear. She ate it sitting on the edge of a cot in the back of a church shelter, her resume folder curled at her feet like a kicked dog. But later that night something strange happened. She opened her resume again, smoothed it out on her lap. And she didn't tear it up. She added to it. She remembered a short freelance gig she did months ago, helping a woman clean up her online shop's data records. It was unpaid, but Emma had created a whole Excel tracking system from scratch. So she wrote it down. That's what made Emma different. The world had taught her to expect rejection, but it hadn't taught her to give up. She started staying later at the library, brushing up on interview strategies, revising cover letters. She checked job boards at dawn, circled classifieds in the free weekly paper, even tried her luck on Craigslist gigs. During the day she worked anything she could find: dishwashing, flyer distribution, grocery stocking. She barely slept. But when you've been homeless, the body learns to run on fumes. One night, while scrolling through a public computer at the library, she saw it. A listing from a massive company. One she'd only heard of in headlines and podcasts. Reinhold & West, a global analytics and tech firm. They were hiring junior data analysts. They wanted people with a passion for data and a hunger to grow. No mention of Ivy League degrees. No list of Fortune 500 internships. Just, come ready. Come curious. Come honest. Emma stared at the screen so long, the library lights flickered for closing. She went back to the shelter, pulled out her folder, and rewrote her resume one more time, this time with bold, steady hands. She applied online at 3:47 a.m. from a library parking lot with spotty Wi-Fi. The confirmation email arrived seconds later. And for the first time in months she allowed herself something dangerous. Hope. Not the kind of blind, shiny hope that melts in daylight, but the tired, quiet kind. The one that grows in cracked sidewalks and stolen moments. She whispered to herself as she closed her eyes that morning. You are not where you came from. You are what you do next. She didn't know, of course, that the interview at Reinhold West would be just as cruel as the others. That the conference room would sting worse than the streets. But none of that mattered yet. Because at that moment, alone, exhausted, and invisible, Emma believed she still had something to give. The room had gone quiet in that specific way that hurts more than shouting. Emma stood in the center of the polished conference room, heart pounding beneath the thin lining of her coat, the air around her growing colder with every second of silence. And then the first shot landed. So, do you work in the building already? One of the panelists asked, eyebrows raised with feigned innocence. Emma blinked. No, Because we thought maybe you were with facilities, another one chimed in, nodding toward her coat. Janitorial maybe? Laughter. Short, sharp, ugly. The kind that carries more weight than words. The woman on the end, the one who hadn't looked up from her phone during the first half of the interview, finally glanced at Emma with a smirk. This isn't a walk-in program, you know. This is a corporate position. I know exactly what it is, Emma said, her voice soft but steady. But they weren't listening. The man with the silver pen, the one who'd barely spoken, finally leaned back in his chair, opened her resume folder, scanned it for no more than 2 seconds, then made a show of sighing. Get. Online certification. Freelance with no references. No degree. No experience in a comparable environment, he listed like a judge reading a sentence. Miss, with respect, you're not a serious candidate. This isn't a classroom project. This is Reinhold West. I understand that, Emma said, trying to keep her breathing even. But if you'll let me. He raised his hand again. We've already spent too much time here. The man beside him chuckled. Honestly, it's almost impressive. Walking in here dressed like this, thinking we wouldn't notice. The audacity. Her cheeks burned, but not from shame. From fury. She wanted to ask why clothes mattered more than competence. Why poverty erased potential in their eyes. Why they were so afraid of someone who had nothing, except the will to try. But she stayed still. The silver pen man closed the folder, turned slightly in his chair, and without looking tossed it into the small trash bin by the wall. The sound it made was deafening. No one flinched. Emma's eyes didn't leave the bin. She had poured every sleepless night, every ounce of belief she had left into those pages. Her whole journey reduced to recyclable waste. And just when it felt like the air had been sucked out of the room completely, one of the men leaned in and whispered, mocking, casual, cruel. "She's probably just here to warm up. Looks like she sleeps outside." The others didn't even bother to laugh this time. They simply waited for her to leave. The room shifted. Not from anything said, just the sound of the door opening. A hush fell over the panel like someone had thrown a switch. Chairs squeaked. Laptops snapped shut. Phones disappeared under folders. Every member of the interview committee rose like a tide, spines straightening in unison. Even the silver pen man stood, eyes suddenly full of respect. Because he had walked in. Jonathan Keene, CEO of Reinhold West. A man known for making billion-dollar decisions with less than a sentence. Tall, sharply dressed, eyes like storms held back by sheer will. He didn't speak often. He didn't need to. He entered the room like gravity had shifted with him. Emma turned slowly, her throat tight. She hadn't expected anyone else. Certainly not him. She braced herself for the worst. Maybe he'd seen her on security cameras. Maybe someone had called him down to escort her out personally. She locked eyes with him. And something inside her cracked open. For a moment, the entire room vanished. The suits, the sneers, the tension. All that remained were two people frozen in time, staring across 2 decades of silence. His breath caught. Her name slipped from his lips like it had been locked away for a lifetime. Emma? The room blinked. The board members looked at one another, unsure if they'd heard correctly. Some shifted awkwardly. Others looked at Emma like she'd committed a crime. The CEO took one step closer. His jaw clenched, emotion flickering in eyes that had seen too much. Emma didn't speak. She couldn't. Her chest ached from holding it all in, memories she'd buried, questions she'd never dared to ask. He turned to the panel, voice low but sharp enough to cut concrete. "This interview is over." Someone stammered. "Sir, we were just." "Over?" he repeated, calm and final. He didn't yell. He didn't need to. The silver pen man opened his mouth, then thought better of it. Chairs shuffled. One by one, they gathered their things and left the room, their faces pale and confused. Only Emma and the CEO remained. She stood motionless, hands at her sides, heart pounding in her ears. He took another step closer. She could see it now, behind the control, behind the tailored image of the corporate giant. The guilt. The disbelief. Time had done its damage. They hadn't seen each other in 20 years. Not since she'd been left on the steps of a church, waiting for a father who never came back. But now he stood before her. Not in a courtroom. Not in a reunion show. In the place where she had come to prove she was more than her past. And now everything had changed. The silence before the storm had ended. And the reckoning was just beginning. The door shut behind them with a dull thud. His office was glass and steel and silence. No family photos. No warm distractions. Just the skyline view and the soft hum of guilt. Emma didn't sit. She stood stiff near the wall, arms folded tight over her chest, every part of her wired for retreat. Richard Keene, CEO legend untouchable, sat down slowly at his desk like a man carrying bricks on his back. He didn't reach for his phone. Didn't offer water. He just looked at her, not like a stranger, but like a man who'd rehearsed this moment 1,000 times and still had no idea what to say. "I wasn't supposed to be there that day," he finally said. His voice was different now, no authority, no polish. Just raw. "I was 23. Broke. Stupid. I wasn't ready." Emma said nothing. "I told myself I'd come back. That I just needed a few months to get on my feet. Then a few more. Then, it became years." She flinched slightly. Not visibly but enough for him to see it. It knocked the breath out of him. "I looked for you. When I had the means. When I finally grew up. But the system, it didn't leave breadcrumbs. I didn't even know if you were alive." "I was," she said quietly. "Just not in any way that mattered to you." That cut him deeper than he let on. He nodded, eyes lowered. "I wasn't there when you needed me. And I can never change that. I built this place thinking maybe one day I'd be worth something. Enough for you to find me. Or for me to find the courage." She leaned against the window, eyes glassy but dry. "You think this office makes you worth something? You think this building makes up for what I went through? He shook his head slowly. No, I don't. But it's all I have left to offer. A name. A space. Maybe a way to help you rebuild. If you even want that. The silence stretched between them like a tightrope. You left a child behind, Richard, she said, her voice a whisper edged with steel. Not just physically. Emotionally. You let the world eat me alive. His hands clenched on the desk. I know. Another pause. I don't forgive you, she said. Not yet. I don't expect you to. But I'm here. I didn't come to you. I came to this company. For a job. Not a reunion. He met her gaze. Then let's start with that. Let me at least make that right. Her jaw clenched. But she nodded once. Just once. Because maybe the road back wasn't forgiveness. Maybe it was just listening first. And he was finally doing that. They sat in the office long after the apology had been spoken and heard, but not yet healed. Emma took the chair across from him now, not as a child craving answers, but as a woman deciding what to do with them. So, what now? She asked quietly, breaking the heavy silence. Richard exhaled. Now, I don't pretend this is fixed. I don't expect forgiveness. But I do want something real. A beginning. She studied him. His suit, his posture, the etched worry lines in his face. He looked like success had cost him more than he wanted to admit. Do you know, she said, I used to imagine what I'd say if I ever found you. Sometimes I'd plan to scream. Other times just walk away. And now, he asked, afraid of the answer. Now, I'm tired. Tired of fighting ghosts. Tired of being angry at someone who wasn't there to yell at. That hit him harder than any accusation. I want to know who you are, she added, but only if you're ready to know who I've become. He nodded instantly. Yes, please, tell me. And so she did. Not all at once. Not in detail. But enough. Enough to show him that she wasn't just a child lost in the system. She had become a woman who had clawed her way out of shadows no one should live in. She told him about the shelters. The jobs. The library where she taught herself coding at night. The women who helped her. The nights she had nothing but ramen and resolve. He didn't interrupt. Didn't cry. Just listened. She paused, then smiled faintly. I'm not asking for pity. You'd never need it, he said quietly. He reached across the table, not to hold her hand but to offer something smaller. Respect. Presence. She didn't take his hand. But she didn't pull away either. I was going to walk out of that room today, she said. Forget this place forever. Why didn't you? She looked him in the eye. Because for the first time, someone finally saw me. Not as poor. Not as broken. But as worth listening to. He nodded, his voice almost breaking. Then let's make sure they all see you now. Pause. You're not just welcome here, Emma, he added. You belong here. The door to the conference room opened again. Same sound. Same silence. But this time the air had changed. Richard Keene walked in first, his face unreadable but his steps deliberate. The panel, still milling in quiet confusion, turned like schoolchildren awaiting judgment. They had no idea what was coming. Behind him walked Emma. Shoulders back. Chin up. Her face held no apology, no plea for understanding. Just a calm, earned dignity. She didn't need them to like her. She had finally remembered who she was. Richard stood at the head of the room and waited. The room obeyed. I want to address what just happened here, he began. His voice was cool, measured, but every syllable landed with weight. An interview took place that violated every principle we claim to uphold. Eyes darted. No one dared speak. A candidate came here seeking opportunity. She brought more experience than most of you in this room combined. She brought intelligence, resilience, and perspective. What she received was mockery. Disrespect. Dismissal. He looked straight at Silver Pen, whose face had gone ghost pale. You laughed at her shoes, Richard continued. You threw out her resume without reading a word. And one of you asked if she was from a shelter. He let that sit, sharp and cruel in the still air. Heads lowered. Someone muttered an apology. It didn't matter. Richard's tone shifted. Let me be perfectly clear. That woman, he stepped aside, gesturing to Emma, is not just your equal. She is your new superior. A ripple of confusion moved through the room. I am naming Emma Clark as the new Director of Social Equity and Outreach. Effective immediately. She will lead our efforts to dismantle the exact kind of gatekeeping I just witnessed. Mouths opened. No one spoke. And one more thing, he added, softer now but with iron behind the words. Emma is my daughter. Shock detonated like a silent bomb. Some gasped. Some stared. One woman backed into a chair. But Emma just stood there unmoved. Come. As if all her scars had finally become armor. The silence after his announcement wasn't awkward. It was humbling. Richard turned to her. You have full authority. If any of these people don't serve your mission, replace them. Emma finally looked around the room. The same faces that had laughed now avoided her eyes. Not out of fear. Out of shame. She didn't smile at them. She didn't need to. But then, just before she turned to leave, her lips lifted slightly. Not with pain. Not with survival. With pride. It was the first real smile she'd worn in years. And it wasn't for them. It was for her. She had walked into this building to find a job. Instead, she found her voice. Her dignity. Her name. And now, they would all remember it. It had been 6 months. 6 months since the interview that turned into a reckoning. 6 months since the man in the expensive suit called her daughter, not just in blood but with his voice, quiet, certain, public. Emma sat in her new office now. A real one. Her name on the door. Her own space. No more shared beds, no more skipped meals. And yet, it wasn't the desk or the view that made her stay. It was the second chance to rewrite a story she thought was already finished. Their relationship hadn't bloomed like in the movies. There were no montages of laughter and dinners and easy forgiveness. Instead, it was a slow rebuild. A call once a week. Then twice. A lunch where they mostly talked about work. Then one where they didn't. He started sending her articles. Books. She sent them back with sticky notes. Half jokes. Real questions. They were learning each other not as parent and child, but as two survivors of different storms trying to meet somewhere in the calm. He never pushed. She never promised. But one day she showed up to his house for dinner. Unannounced. He opened the door and said nothing. Just stepped aside. That night they didn't talk about the past. They just watched a movie and argued over which flavor of popcorn was better. It was ordinary. And that made it everything. At work, she reshaped the entire hiring pipeline. Removed barriers she had once tripped over herself. She gave interviews to women in shelters, immigrants, older candidates no one else would touch. She saw their fire. She knew that fire. And Richard? He let her lead. Stood back when needed. Fought beside her when it counted. Not because he was trying to make up for the past, but because he believed in her now. Not in theory. In action. One afternoon she found a framed photo on her desk. A girl aged 6 smiling through missing teeth. It was her. It must have been the only picture he had. On the back he had written, "Still here. Still proud. Love, Dad." She didn't cry. Not then. But that night when she got home she held that frame for a long, quiet minute. They weren't a perfect family. They never would be. But they had something better. They had a choice. To stay. To build. To try. And sometimes, that was enough.